Hello chess friends and welcome to Jozarov's chess channel and welcome to my Basics in Chess series. So in this series we follow opening principles, middle game strategies and the endgame strategies. Today we'll do an endgame strategy again. Today we'll do the so-called Tarrassch rule. And the Tarrassch rule is really one of the most important rules in chess endings, in rook chess endings. Well, the Tarrassch rule says that you should place your rook behind pass pawns, either yours or your opponent's. This is a very important topic because while playing in endgame we forget sometimes about this very important rule, and then your opponent can play some active moves, maybe with his own rook, maybe some with his own king, and then you end the endgame maybe in a draw or even in a losing game. So while following this very important rule, you have also one important rule to combine with the Tarrassch rule, and this is so-called trading off pieces rule, because when you're playing an endgame with one pawn down, you should really try to trade off as many of the pawns as possible, because then if you have maybe a situation you have 3 pawns and your opponent has 4 pawns, maybe with some rooks on the board, you should really try to simplify the position and trade off as many of these pawns as possible, because then maybe after a couple of trades of pawns we have the situation in which your opponent has only one pawn and a rook, and you have a rook, and the position is much more simplified, and then you can maybe get a draw. Of course, from the other side, when you're playing rook endgame with 4 pawns against your opponent's 3 pawns, your main idea is to trade off this rook. So your main idea is to trade off pieces, not pawns. Then you can maybe go into a favorable endgame with this 4-on-3 situations, and then you can create a pass pawn and really have a winning endgame. So let's see now the Tarrassch rule. Here it's very important. Of course, I always like to simplify the position just to get you a better understanding of these positions. Here you see, while playing this rook endgame, here first of all you should place this rook behind pass pawns, either yours, of course you're supporting now this very important b6 pawn, but here also you're protecting here a potential promotion of b1, because you have placed your rook behind your opponent's pass pawn. So let's see now a couple of examples. First of all, here it's a very good and very instructive endgame. It's played by Alekhine against Jozarov Capablanca, and here you can pause the video and try to find the best move here for white to play. You can also try this Tarrassch rule, which is very important. I'm not saying that you will win this game immediately, because the endgame is of course something you have to play for many moves, but here of course the best move is now to play the move rook on d4. Rook on d4 with the idea to play, of course, after rook on a6, rook on a4, and now we have this supported pass pawn. But rook on d4 is of course the best move, not maybe something like rook on d3, rook on d2, or rook on d1, because we are staying now on a 4th rank. It means that your opponent cannot infiltrate in your position with his king, because this rook has cut off this very important 4th rank for the king, and now we can play very actively with the king, maybe try to go with our king more actively into the game, attacking this rook, and move simply forward with our own pawn. So these are the main ideas. I want you to try to realize these positions as sort of as an elevator. Here the rook on a6, he's stuck on the 6th floor, but meanwhile you can move your rook here really actively, like in the elevator. You can move your on the 1st floor, 2nd floor, 3rd floor, and 4th floor. So here it's perfectly fine. We have now a very good activity with our own rook, so that's why here of course it's a winning game for black. Let's see the continuation. King on f6, we have king on f3, we have king on e5, king on e3 going into no position. Here h5, rook, king on d3, king on d5, king on c3. You see now we create a decisive tempo, very important. Now after rook, king on b5, now king on b3, and here if your opponent trades off this rooks here, then of course we are much faster, and we can go after this pawn, then after this pawn, and we have a completely winning endgame here. So that's why here again rook on b5 was played, but now Alekhine decides to go with his king on d4, going, as I said, on this very important f6 square. Here, king on d6, king on e5. We have king on rook on e6, king on f4, king on a6, but now king on g5. Very important, because after rook on e5, now king on h6, and we go now after this pawn, because we have now again the Tarrassch rule. We have the supported pass pawn, which is really creating a certain obligation here for black's king or for black's rook, because now we have the king on a6, not the rook. But still, one of these pieces, either the rook or the king, are really passive. You see how active now the white's king can be, because of this very important rule in chess. So rook on f5, we have now f4, of course, rook on c5, rook on a3, rook on c7, king on g7, of course now f5, cracking the position. We want to break this pawn chain, create many weak pawns. After g takes f5, now king on h6, f4, we have g takes f4, rook on d5, but now very important move, king on g7, rook on f5, but now very good move, rook on a5, of course king on b5, but now rook on e4, king on a6, but now king on h6, rook takes on a5, and now it's really winning game here for white. If you trade off these rooks, of course the white's king is much closer to these pawns. Rook on a1, rook takes on h5, rook on g1, rook on g5 was played, rook on h1, now rook on f5, king on b6, now rook takes on f7, rook on c6, now rook on e7. Also a very important principle in chess, cutting off this very important file for the king, so the king cannot go maybe here on the e or f file and support the rook from against this potential promotion of this pawn. So here in this position, Jozarov Capablanca resigned, because there's no way that this king will support, and of course one of these pawns will then promote the queen. You have to give up your rook for this pawn, and then of course it's at least we have a rook endgame in which your opponent doesn't have a rook, and you can of course after a couple of moves checkmate your opponent. So let's see now another example. It's a game played by Henrique Mecking against Victor Korchnoi. Here, after a couple of trades of pieces, and here rook on c1 was played by white. Here rook takes on a4, now rook takes on c6, and now rook on b4, and now we have this Tarrassch rule, of course, because our opponent has a pass pawn. We should really go with our rook behind this pawn and try to at least get a draw here. So a4, h4 was played, now g6, we have king on g2, king on g7, f3, h5, king on h3, rook on c4, and now after rook on a5, king on f6, now comes this rule. As I said, when we are maybe a pawn down, we should really try to trade off as many pawns as possible. Here we shouldn't really trade off these rooks. If we trade off these rooks, then your opponent has of course a pass pawn situation. Here a takes g4, after a takes g4, rook on c3 was played, king on g2, it's not a problem. Now a3, now we have h5, creating even more simplified position, king on g7, rook on a6, we have king on h6, h takes g6, now f takes g6, and now rook on a5, cutting off this fifth rank for the king. King on g7, now simply playing with the rook, not allowing your opponent to infiltrate in the position to support this pass pawn with the king. King on f2, g5, rook on a5, we have rook on c2, king on f3, now a2, and now we have again the same motif, rook on a6, cutting off this king even on a higher rank. Now we have cut off this king on a 6th rank. King on g7, now of course king on e4, rook on f2, and now king on e3, rook on b2, and in this position both of the players agree to a draw, because our main idea is to take this pawn, and of course you cannot promote, because this rook can never support the promotion, because if you try of course rook on b1, then we can take this pawn on a2. So let's see now another example. It was a game played by Artur Yusupov against Antonio Antunes. Here, after trades of rooks, you see black made a mistake. He traded off pieces, not pawns, in this position. Now the position is much more simplified. Maybe with two rooks on the board, you have still some tactical chances to create maybe some perpetual checks. You see now after trade of rooks, now the position, as I said, much more simplified. Rook on d2 was played, but now simply playing h5, rook takes on a2, h6, rook on b2, h7, rook on b8, now rook on h4, simply playing with this Tarrassch rule, supporting the pass pawn here. Rook on h8 had to be played, and again we have this elevator situation, which I've explained. Now this rook is really stuck here on this 8th rank. King on f1, c4 was played, rook on h5, e5, now king on e2, of course, king on c5, rook takes on e5, king on b4. Now again with the same idea, again creating this Tarrassch rule, rook takes on a4, but now king on d2, the king can go much further into the game. Now very important move, rook on b5, king on a4, now cutting off again this king. Now the king is cut off on the b file. You see this king will always be on the a file. Rook takes on h7 was played, king on c3, rook king on a5, pardon me, king takes on c4, king on a6, but now rook on e7, king on b6. Now we're again playing much more active with our king, with our own king. Rook on h5, now rook on e4, f5, king on e5, rook on h2, and now f4. In this position, black resigned. If you try something like rook on g2, then of course we can play rook on g7, protecting this pawn, and then maybe after king on c6 we can simply take this pawn, again try to cut off this king from maybe to try support here through the d file or e file, and then we simply push forward this pawn and have a really winning endgame here. So of course we have now also two connected pass pawns, which is really a thematic win. So we have many winning possibilities here as white. That's why here black resigned in this position. Let's see now another example. It was an endgame played by Anthony Mouse against Vlastimil Hort. Black is one pawn up, and again white makes the same mistake. White trades off the pieces, not the pawns on the board, and in the continuation bishop on c3 was played. That's why bishop on c3, it's perfectly fine here for black, because we want to simplify the position. Here after rook takes on c3, bishop on e6 was played, rook on a3, rook on a2. We have now rook on d3, a3. We have bishop on d5, bishop takes on d5, rook takes on d5, and now rook on b2. Now g4, a2 was played. Now of course rook on a5 had to be played, but now very important move f6, which liberates now this diagonal for the king. So the king now can play now very actively in the endgame. h4, we have king on f7, rook on a6, king on e8, king on g3, king on d7, f3, rook on c7, g5, king on b7, rook on a3, and now after f5, king on f4 was played, and here after king on b6, king on e5, and this was the decisive mistake, because it gives now black a decisive tempo. You can pause the video and try to solve this endgame puzzle. It's really now winning for black. And of course it's the move rook on b5 with this intermediate check. Here after maybe king on e6 we can play rook on a5, playing on the Tarrassch rule, going simply behind this pawn. Now you have to trade off these rooks or even give up maybe the rook here for the pawn. Then of course again it's a completely winning endgame here for black. Okay, I hope you realize these ideas. As said, this is the main idea of the Tarrasch rule, going behind the pawns, either yours or your opponent's pass pawns. Very, very important rule in chess. You see many players make some mistakes in the endgame, and you should really punish them by playing on this very, very cool but simple rule here in chess. Okay, I hope you enjoyed this video, and meanwhile you can watch my other basics in chess videos with some other opening principles, middle game strategies and end game strategies, and you can also watch my chess tactics and chess puzzles videos in which I show you all of the possible tactical motifs that can happen in chess game. Thank you for watching, guys, and chess is the best, of course.